16 steps lead down through the bedrock of the Valley of the Kings, and at the bottom of them is a doorway that was plastered shut more than 3,200 years ago and stamped, again and again, with the seal of a jackal crouched above 9 bound captives. On the 26th of November, 1922, Howard Carter scraped a hole through the upper corner of a second doorway just like it, pushed a candle into the dark, and looked into a room no living person had seen since the 12th century before Christ. Behind him in the corridor, Lord Carnarvon asked whether he could see anything. Carter said he saw wonderful things. What he was actually looking at, though he could not have known it that afternoon, was the only royal burial of ancient Egypt ever recovered nearly intact, packed around the body of a king who died at about 19 years old, with a freshly broken leg, loose fragments of bone inside his skull, a burned body, and no heart. For a full century that death has been x-rayed, scanned, sampled, and argued over, and the answer that finally came out of the machines is stranger than the murder story that made him famous. Stranger still is what Egypt chose to seal into the ground beside him, because this tomb was closed in a hurry, and it was closed on far more than a boy. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The version everyone learns is simple. Tutankhamun was a minor king with a short reign. He died young of natural causes, and his one real distinction is that grave robbers never emptied his tomb. Parts of that hold. But stand inside the tomb itself, and the standard account develops a crack you can see with your own eyes. The tomb is wrong. It has 4 cramped rooms and a floor plan that matches the private tomb of a noble, while every other pharaoh of his dynasty was given long descending corridors cut deep into the cliff. And scattered across the painted plaster of the burial chamber are hundreds of small brown spots. In 2011, conservators working with the Getty Conservation Institute analyzed those spots and concluded they are the dried remains of microbial colonies, and that colonies like that could only have grown because the paint was still wet when the chamber was sealed. Egypt buried this king so fast the walls had not dried. Whoever closed that room was in a hurry, and everything that follows comes back to the question of what they were hurrying to close. The tomb is catalogued as KV62. And the inventory Carter spent 10 years clearing from it runs to 5,398 objects. 3 coffins nested one inside another, the innermost around 110 kilograms of solid gold. The mask more than 10 kilograms of gold inlaid with lapis and quartz. 6 full chariots, dismantled to fit through the door. A dagger whose iron blade was tested in 2016 with X-ray fluorescence, in a study published in the journal Meteoritics and Planetary Science, and found to carry the exact nickel and cobalt signature of meteoric iron. The boy king was buried holding a knife forged from a fallen star. 2 tiny coffins holding 2 mummified fetuses, and DNA testing in 2010 confirmed they were his stillborn daughters. And, leaning against walls and bundled into boxes, 130 walking sticks, many with wear polished into the grips by a living hand. A king of 19 buried with 130 canes. Every one of those objects is real, catalogued, photographed, and on record in Cairo. They are the frame around the body, and the body is where the mystery starts. For its first 50 years, the discovery was a treasure story. Then, in 1968, Ronald Harrison, a professor of anatomy at the University of Liverpool, brought a portable X-ray machine into the tomb and imaged the mummy where it lay. The plates showed loose fragments of bone inside the skull, and a region at the base of the skull where the bone looked unusually thin. Out of those 2 shadows grew the most famous cold case in archaeology, the boy king killed by a blow to the back of the head. The theory came with a suspect ready-made. The old vizier who had served the family for decades, took the throne within weeks of the king's death and married his widow. And on the north wall of the burial chamber, had himself painted performing the opening of the mouth ceremony on Tutankhamun's mummy, a successor burying his predecessor with his own hands, a scene no other royal tomb in Egypt shows. In 1998, the Egyptologist Bob Brier laid the whole case out in a book titled The Murder of Tutankhamun, and for a generation the wall stood, motive, opportunity, and an X-ray plate. It was a solid wall, and it was reasonable to believe it. Then the scanner arrived. In 2005, the mummy was lifted out of the tomb and passed through a CT machine that took 1,700 cross-sections of the entire body. The murder blow dissolved on the screen. There was no depressed fracture and no healed injury at the back of the head. The loose fragments matched breaks made after death, some by the embalmers, some by Carter's own team, who in 1925 had cut the body apart to pry it out of the hardened resin, gluing it to the coffin. But the scan found what the old plates had missed. The left thigh bone was snapped just above the knee, the edges of the break ragged and unhealed, and embalming resin had flowed inside the fracture, which means the wound was still open when he died, days at most before death. 5 years later, a team of Egyptian and German researchers published the DNA results in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The king's tissue carried Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest form of malaria, with traces of repeated infection. The bones of his left foot were partly dead from a circulatory disorder called Koehler disease, and the foot itself was deformed. The 130 canes stopped being a puzzle. The published verdict, and it stands today as the official one, is that a young man weakened by malaria died of complications from a badly broken leg. I will be straight with you. That is the documented answer, and it is the closest thing to a verdict a 3,000-year-old body can give. But mark exactly where the certainty stops, because the scan can say the leg snapped and it cannot say how. A frail king with a half-dead foot, who could not cross a room without a stick in his hand, does not shatter a femur standing still. 6 chariots went into that tomb with him. In 2013, a British team working with the Egypt Exploration Society ran a vehicle impact simulation against his injury pattern and argued that a chariot wheel striking a kneeling or fallen body would produce almost exactly what the mummy shows: the smashed left side, the broken thigh, the destroyed front of the chest. That reading is a theory, and I flag it as one, but it fits the wounds better than any rival on the table. The same investigation returned to a detail Carter's anatomists recorded in the 1920s, and no one ever explained. The flesh of the mummy is charred. Chemical tests on tissue samples suggested the embalming oils had ignited inside the sealed coffin, and that the king's body burned after burial, cooked by a botched, rushed embalming, the same haste that left the paint wet on the walls. And one thing is missing that should never be missing. The heart, the single organ Egyptian embalmers always left inside the body, because the dead could not face judgment without it, is gone. The front of the chest wall is destroyed, and specialists still argue whether that damage happened at the moment of death, on the embalming table, or in the modern era. The medical file closes on a parasite and a broken leg. Everything surrounding the file stays open, because the record of what happened around that death reads like the file of a coup. Egyptian embalming took roughly 70 days, and by the time the tomb was sealed, I was already wearing the crown. Then there is the letter. It survives in the royal archive of Egypt's greatest enemy, in the annals called the Deeds of Suppiluliuma, written on clay tablets at the Hittite capital of Hattusa, in what is now Turkey, and compiled by the Hittite king's own son. The annals record that a queen of Egypt wrote to Suppiluliuma after her husband's death, and her words are preserved. My husband has died, and I have no son. They say that you have many sons. Give me one of your sons, and I will make him my husband. I am afraid. I will never take a servant of mine and make him my husband. The Hittite king refused to believe it. Egypt and Hatti were rivals on the edge of war. Queens of Egypt did not offer the throne to foreign princes, and nothing like it had happened in the history of either country. He sent an envoy south to verify. The queen wrote back, insulted and more desperate, and the annals preserve that second letter too. So Suppiluliuma sent a son, a prince named Zenanza, riding toward Egypt to become pharaoh. Zenanza died on the road. The Hittite records treat his death as murder, and the fury over it helped drive the two empires into open war. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The tablets call the queen Dahamunzu, which is the Hittite scribe's rendering of an Egyptian title, Ta Hemet Nesu, the king's wife. Most specialists read her as Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's widow, though some argue the letters belong a few years earlier in the dynasty, and the identification is probable rather than proven. If it is her, then the widowed queen of Egypt was so unwilling to marry the man waiting at home that she asked her country's enemy for a husband instead. and the man waiting at home was I. A blue glass ring that surfaced in the Cairo Antiquities Market in 1931 carries the cartouches of Ia and Ankhesenamun set side by side, the pairing Egypt used to mark a royal marriage. After that ring, she vanishes. No tomb, no mummy, no death date, no monument. The last daughter of her dynasty steps out of the record between one line and the next. Now go back into the tomb, because the gold itself has testimony to give. When researchers examined the 4 small coffins that held the king's internal organs, they found the royal cartouches had been reworked, and beneath Tutankhamun's name sat traces of an earlier one, Nefertiti. That is a throne name, and it did not belong to him. Nefertiti was a woman who ruled Egypt as pharaoh in the confusion after Akhenaten's death, and the strongest current argument holds that she was Nefertiti herself, reigning under a new name, though some scholars back her daughter Meritaten instead. Once the reworked cartouches were recognized, the pattern spread through the inventory. Shabti figures, pectorals, pieces of the gilded shrines, elements of the second coffin, item after item made for her and relabeled for him. In 2015, the Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves pointed out what had been sitting in plain sight for 90 years. The ears of the gold mask are pierced for earrings, which finished portraits of adult kings never show, and the cartouche on its shoulder carries the marks of alteration. On his reading, the most famous face in archaeology began as the funeral mask of a woman, and the face the world photographs as Tutankhamun may be a reworked portrait of the very pharaoh Egypt was busiest erasing. The mask claim is still argued. The wider pattern is accepted. The boy was buried in a dead ruler's equipment, hastily renamed, while that ruler's reign was being deleted from the record around him. Deleted is the precise word. Within about 4 years I was dead, and the throne passed to Horemheb, a general with no royal blood and a long memory. Under him and the kings who followed, the whole Amarna period was removed. The city Akhenaten built was pulled apart block by block, and the blocks were used as fill inside later temples, the evidence hidden inside the walls of buildings that still stand. The names of Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and Ia were cut from monument after monument. The great stela on which Tutankhamun proclaimed the restoration of the old gods was recarved with Horemheb's name, so that even the boy's one act of consequence was taken from him. And when Seti I carved his ancestral king list into the temple wall at Abydos 2 generations later, the sequence runs from Amenhotep III straight to Horemheb, as though no one at all had reigned in between. Tutankhamun was removed from the official history of his own country, on purpose, by his own successors. And the Valley of the Kings holds the irony with a straight face, because the erasure is what saved him. His small, unmarked tomb was buried under flood debris within a couple of centuries. Workmen cutting the tomb of Ramesses VI built their huts directly over the entrance without knowing what lay beneath their cooking fires. Robbers broke in twice soon after the burial, took perfumed oils and small metal, and never came back. Every great king on the Abydos list was stripped bare by tomb robbers who knew exactly where the great kings slept. The one king deleted from the list kept his gold for 3,000 years, because nobody remembered there was anything down there to find. Which brings us, last, to the wall. In 2015, Reeves was studying ultra-high-resolution scans of the burial chamber, made for a facsimile project, when he saw what he took to be the traces of 2 sealed doorways beneath the painted plaster of the north and west walls. He pointed to something Egyptologists had long noticed and set aside. KV62 turns to the right off its entrance corridor, the layout Egypt used for queens, while the tombs of kings turn left. His theory followed from the geometry. The 4 cramped rooms might be only the outer section of a much larger tomb, and behind the painted north wall, on his reading, lies an older, undisturbed burial, and the name he put on it was Nefertiti. The radar went in. In 2015, a Japanese specialist named Hirokatsu Watanabe scanned the wall and announced voids behind it, with signals he read as organic and metallic material. A second survey in 2016, run for National Geographic, came back inconclusive and was never published. In 2018, a third survey, led by Francesco Porcelli of the Polytechnic University of Turin and the most thorough of the three, concluded there was no evidence of hidden chambers at all, and most Egyptologists now consider the question closed. But look at what actually happened. 3 radar campaigns produced 3 different answers, and the wall itself cannot be opened without destroying a 3,000-year-old painting. The instruments disagreed with one another, the surveys stopped, and the wall stands today exactly as Ai's workmen left it. Nobody has ever looked behind it. So put the vault back together, starting with the death. The documented verdict is malaria on top of a shattered leg, and the record honestly supports it. How the leg shattered, the record does not say, and the strongest reconstruction anyone has offered puts a crippled 19-year-old under a chariot wheel, moving at speed when he had no business moving at all. His body was embalmed so badly and so fast that it burned inside its own coffin. His heart was never found. And what Egypt sealed in his tomb was a dynasty, the gold of an erased female pharaoh, stripped of her name and bent around a boy. His 2 stillborn daughters, the end of the bloodline, in coffins barely long enough to hold them. 130 canes, a dagger forged from a meteorite, walls closed while the paint was still wet, by men who then deleted his name from history and, without meaning to, hid him so well that he became the only pharaoh the robbers never truly found. The tomb of Tutankhamun is the sealed archive of the century Egypt refused to remember, and the only reason we can open that century at all is that the lock held. And the vault is still not empty. Ankhesenamun, the queen who wrote to her enemies rather than marry the man who buried her husband, has never been found. 2 unidentified female mummies from a nearby tomb catalogued as KV-21 have been proposed as candidates on the basis of partial DNA, and the testing has never been completed. The heart has never been accounted for. The north wall has never been opened. Before I let you go, one thing said plainly. This is a channel about the questions the ancient world has not fully answered. Some of what you heard tonight is solid and documented. The scans, the tablets, the reworked gold, the tomb itself. Some of it is theory, and where it was, I said so. The point is to show you what is actually down there and let you decide what you think it means, rather than to hand you a verdict someone else wrote. 16 steps still lead down through the bedrock of the valley. The jackal seal sits in a museum case. The wall Ai's workmen plastered shut is still standing, painted and unopened, with a hurried king behind it and, if one stubborn reading is right, something older behind him. And somewhere under the sand of Egypt, there may still be a small, unmarked doorway with a frightened queen behind it, waiting the way her husband waited, for someone to notice a step cut into the rock. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.